go to the...
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's forum called An Historic Look at Presidential Campaign Practices. Have they changed? Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Institute of Politics Student Advisory Committee, the Kennedy School Campaigns and Elections Professional Interest Council, the Harvard Radcliffe College Democrats, the Kennedy School Democratic Caucus, the Kennedy School Republican Caucus, and you may join in if you wish. So in order for us to have maximum time on this panel, I'll keep the introductions very short. We're delighted to have with us tonight Charlie Black, who is one of America's leading Republican strategists. He has served as a senior advisor to Presidents Reagan and Bush. In the 1992 campaign, he served as President Bush's principal spokesman. He's also managed a number of very successful U.S. Senator campaigns. Also, James Carville, who is not a Republican strategist.
Papered the house tonight.
He was one of the chief architects of President Clinton's 1992 campaign and has served the president as a senior political advisor. He and his wife, Mary Madeline, a Bush deputy campaign manager, wrote, "All's fair, all's fair, love, war, and running for the president," perhaps the most successful bipartisan undertaking in recent memory. His newer book is entitled, "We're Right, They're Wrong." It is not a bipartisan work. Jules Whitcover is one of a handful of truly distinguished journalists who for years has led readers into the innards of American politics. He writes a daily column with Jack Germond, which is featured in over 100 newspapers, and a weekly column for the National Journal. He's also author of 13 books and a contributor to Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s History of Presidential Campaigns. This year he published The Year the Dream Died, Revisiting 1968 in America. Our moderator tonight will be Jill Hansen, who last spring was a fellow at the Institute of Politics. She has considerable experience in consulting and managing successful gubernatorial and senatorial campaigns. In the 1996 presidential campaign, she played a central role as National Political Director for Senator Dole. Tonight's panelists, all of them, have participated in one or more of the quadrennial campaign decision-maker conferences which the Institute of Politics sponsors after each presidential election and has done so since 1972. Ladies and gentlemen, Jill Hansen.
Thank you, Phil, and thanks to all of you and to our guests for being here tonight. For me, it's great to be back up here. As Phil mentioned, tonight we're going to talk about presidential campaign practices and how they've changed. And in the course of this discussion, I would imagine that the 1996 campaign will come up, and because since we're still reading about it, hearing about it, seeing it, even now a year later. And I cannot think of three more qualified people to talk about presidential campaign practices than our three guests tonight. And what I would like to do is have each of the gentlemen give a brief statement on this subject, and then we'll turn it into a general question and answer period led by me first and then by you, the audience. So with that, Jules, would you like to start out, please?
As the old man in the group, I've been asked to try to give a little historic rundown of where we came from and where we are in terms of campaign practices. My own first campaign was the 1956 campaign between Eisenhower and Stevenson, and not the McKinley campaigns that's been widely rumored. I tried to think about what really were the significant changes in that time that I've been covering politics, and I came up with a couple. One of them, obviously, is television. When I first started covering in 1956, television was fairly minor, but it did make some great contributions, particularly in covering conventions. I think it really sold political conventions to the American people. Unfortunately, it's a harder sell now because the conventions are not nearly as interesting or important. But another thing that was different in those days was that delegates were collected by candidates through party contacts. They traveled around to various states and used party leaders, governors, county chairmen, state chairmen, and so on, to get delegates. There were very few primaries, and there were some primaries, but by and large, it was rare when they were critical. One critical one, obviously, was John Kennedy's famous West Virginia primary in 1960. You also had in running campaigns in those early days what I like to call one-horse jockeys, people who were committed to the candidate either personally, an old friend, or somebody out of the party structure. Eisenhower had a Len Hall. Various other candidates had personal friends. But as a result of all this, campaigns were much less pressure-packed than they are today. Much less money was needed because basically a candidate would get on a plane or a train and go around and talk to some state leaders and wrap up their delegates. And campaigns also started then in January. I remember John Kennedy made his announcement in 1960 in the Senate caucus room. I think it was on the 2nd of January. And even in 1968, Richard Nixon made his announcement in a letter on about the 3rd or 4th day of January. But I think partly because of the Vietnam War, there was a tremendous demand grew for greater voter participation in the whole process. We had what later became the McGovern Commission, where the Democratic Party opened up its process, and as a result of that, I think that was a key factor in leading to the proliferation of primaries. More people could take part. Voters, political activists could have a bigger role. And I think when that happened, it also triggered something else that my friends Charlie and James are a product of, and that is that the whole professional consultant cadre was developed. What you might call the era of the hired gun, and that resulted because for several things. One was obviously because there were so many more primaries. Candidates needed more help. They needed more money to compete in all these primaries. They had to raise more money, and then with the new technologies that were developed in politics, particularly in television, you needed experts. The one-horse jockey was no longer adequately prepared to run the kind of campaign that was evolving as a result of the proliferation of primaries, the need for more money, and all the other aspects of campaigns. Then we had Watergate. And Watergate produced an outcry for reform. One of the things I remember that really triggered the first reforms was the fact that one man, a Chicago insurance man named W. Clement Stone, gave $3 million to the Nixon campaign. This was considered outrageous. And as a result, we had the various reforms, first in 1974 and then in 1976. As with a lot of these reforms, there were unintended consequences. People like my two friends here would find loopholes in the law and find ways to get more money into the campaign because more money was required in the campaigns. When the laws were first written, they had a very unrealistic limit on how much money could be raised and spent by candidates. So you had all these things now were developing that we hear about today: soft money, independent expenditures, ads that supposedly talk about issues but really advance the candidacy of a presidential candidate. At the same time, you had more campaigning in television studios and in paid media, and the campaigns focused on media markets, with the stump campaigning that used to be the centerpiece of campaigns when I first started covering them, becoming kind of a facade for the real campaign that was going on, which was over television, either in free media or paid media. They also had the emergence in the process of celebrity consultants who became, if not as big as the candidates, sometimes as visible as a candidate, and more entertaining, I might say, too. And I think because of their emergence and prominence, we had a lot of, perhaps a greater focus by people in my business on inside baseball. And a lot of criticism has been heard about that. And I think a lot of it is warranted. So ultimately but ultimately I think the product of all this was Dick Morris, who obviously is not represented here tonight, and neither do these gentlemen walk in his footsteps. But the fact is that there's been a terrific amount of mercenary work going on in politics today as a result of all the money and all the opportunity to make money. And I think that that this has contributed to what we see finally in American politics today, which is public disillusionment, public disgust, and ultimately public apathy.
James?
Just before I go, somebody that can figure out what $3 million in 1972 dollars are today, because I want to come back to that. I suspect it's like $7, $8 million, I would think. I think there's a couple of things to remember. I did my first presidential campaign in 1992, although I'm pretty up there. Historically, I want to speak to just a couple of things. Number one, to say the obvious is there has been the fact that you know who I am bespeaks volumes about what's going on in this country and the sort of rise of political consultants or spinners or handlers or whatever you want to call it. And I always turn to Prof. Patterson's book, who I think is here or was here. What happened in the 1960 election, it was charted 80% of the stories were policy stories and 20% were process stories. By 1988, that had flipped to 80% of the stories about the presidential race had turned into process stories and only 20% policy stories. So, in effect, I am certainly a financial beneficiary of a system that was created by the media. But I make no apologies for it. I don't think that I earn any less a living than anyone else, but it is a fact that the fact that you know who I am or you know who other political consultants are, it certainly can be traced in history to that, in modern history. I think two things have really happened that have affected the presidential campaigns, and most of the differences, I think, happens in the primary process, and that time after you go home from the convention. Clearly, conventions, we'll be lucky if 2000 is the last convention that we know that has 4 days. They just, people don't pay attention to them anymore. They feel like they're stage shows. I think that there's going to be a alternate format for conventions. I'll be glad during the Q&A or something to give you what I think is a way to do that. The two big things that I've seen and what we tried to deal with in 92, one of them we tried to deal with, one is just you can't deal with it, is the compression. The first that you can't deal with is the compression of primaries. It happens so fast. I remember when Bobby Kennedy was shot in 1968, the California primary actually meant something. That was the day I got out of the Marine Corps, June the 6th. It was right around there, June the 5th. Sure. That primary meant something. There was a debate going on in the Democratic Party, and it was going on through June. And then they got some intelligent people, some blue ribbon people, some committee people, some academics, and they said that what we're going to do is we're going to rush this thing, and we'll have Super Tuesday, we'll have this. And there was this sort of rush to front load all of these primaries. So what does that mean? What happens when you do that is, guess what? You make money more important. You create a system where, to an absolute truth, if you want to take this down, if you take an exam, if you want to know what truth is, the candidate that has the most money in the bank on January the 1st of the election year is the candidate that is going to get his or her party nomination. Period. It's absolute. There are no exceptions in modern American presidential politics. Why? Because we have compressed the cycle. You go to New Hampshire, in the next thing, where you go to Iowa, the next thing you know, you're in New Hampshire, the next thing you know, it's Super Tuesday. Now they've moved California up, they've got Illinois, Michigan, who can keep, and it's always this race to sort of be there for everybody to say that we want to be relevant, and they do that, and what happens is, and all of the intelligentsia urges them to do that, and we have a more open thing, and we have all of this, and we create a process that you have to have a lot of money to sustain it, because the guy he might have some ideas, but once he runs out of money, he's gone. Butter him, he's toast. period. That's the way it is. I can't. And everybody has got that figured out. Everybody has got that figured out. James Carville didn't figure that out first, or Charlie, or Jill, or Jules. It was figured out from day one. The more you front load these primaries, the more absolutely critical that money becomes. Now, the second thing that's happened, and I think in presidential politics made different is, well, actually they're both related and have to go to me. You have the compression of news cycles. It used to be, you know, people, you would do an event, television, you'd get, I think the average soundbite in 1968 was what, 42 seconds? By 1988 it was 6 seconds. Guess what? They hire people to write 6-second sound bites. I mean, this is a marketplace out there. You give you 42 seconds, you get people that write 42-second sound bites. The net give you 6, and you get somebody that says the economy's stupid. That's life. See, I can't, people will come here and tell you the way things ought to be, or this or that. I'm just going to tell you the way things are. Okay? So we got this. Used to be, people, Jews, the New York Times would write a story, everybody would see what some reporter, you know, had of what Jules had to say, or what Adam Clymer had to say, or whatever someone had to say, and that sort of became the take. Now, 30 seconds after the event, it's on CNN headline news. It's going to be now MSNBC. It's going to be on this. It's going to be, the stories go out immediately. The campaigns watch it, and everything becomes an immediate struggle for primacy to get the story out right there. There's no time for these guys to sit back and reflect on the campaign event. There's no time to do anything. Everybody goes back in their room. They have to file. All the papers come out. The editions come out earlier. The newscast gets set. Understand that an entire presidential campaign in a day takes place generally between about 9:30 and 2:30 Eastern. If you do it before that, you won't get heard. Basically, after 2:30, it's gone. So you have this entire sort of compression. And the reason that spin is so important is because it is important. Because that original take that comes out. Because it used to be that people like Jules, and to some extent, but no one cares about your column 5 days after the event. It is too late, because we all have this sort of urge to get this news fast, to digest it, and people like myself know that first take is the take that really sort of counts out there. So the compression of news cycles and the proliferation of news sources. I mean, it is big. We might think that the net, you know what I mean, as much rant and raving and railing that I do against the nets or against the Times or against the Post, the truth of the matter is that their influence today is probably, I'm almost positive by any measure, would be less than it was in 68 or 64, because they got more competition, and people get news from more sources, and it's just more available to them. Now, all of this, what does it produce? It produces famous consultants. You know, for me, it's good. For you, I don't know. For America, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I don't think that I am any better or worse human being than the man that worked for Eisenhower that knew him all his life. That's some people, you probably have a lot of people disagree and say you are, but I don't know. I don't know the man, so I can't say. But I do know that it's a fact of life. I do know that it creates that. I do know that front-loading all these primaries and not having, I know that creates an unbelievable demand for money. And understand this. Now understand, in 1974, and again, because people forget, we talk about, oh, this has never held, my God, they're out there, they're raising money. If man gave $3 million in 1972, some economists figure what that is today. 1974, and I told the class earlier, remember what they passed in 1974 is reform. If you ever want to remember one thing in your life, remember this, that anything they do, they're going to put reform on the end of it. There never has been a bill that ever passed the Congress that the last word in the legislation was not reform. Now, 1974, you could get, an individual could give a federal candidate $1,000, and a PAC could give $5,000. Now, do you know what it is today? It's $1,000, and it's $5,000. Now, guess what? So when you take inflation, you have cut easy in half, probably by more than that, the effective amount of money that an individual in a PAC can give you. What does that do? That puts enormous pressure to go get soft money, to go get alternate money, party money, independent expenditure money, and bring. Why these idiots have not figured this out yet, I don't know. Why somebody on some talk show hasn't sort of said, what we've done by maintaining this is create enormous pressure on the system. What you've done is two things. You've created a system that makes money more important than it's ever been, and you created a system that devalues the amount of money that an individual or pack can give to you, and then everybody acts surprised that these people spend all of their time raising money. And how no editorial writer or no one has ever figured this out. Or at least maybe they have, but I haven't seen the point made. And they go through all these hearings, and it's like an old-time posse. They go around a circle and they're just shooting their guns in the air. There is a reason. And you know what's going to happen? In 2000, in 96, money was more important than it was in 92. And it was more important in 92 than it was in 88. And guess what? In 2000, it's going to be more important than it was in 96. And everybody's going to write an article saying they raised more money in 2000 than they did in 96. It's the same thing they wrote before this. And it's an inevitable cycle. It's an inevitable cycle. It is created. And that's just the way it is. You make money more important, and then you diminish the amount of money that these candidates can take. They will seek it somewhere else. It's human nature, folks. Thus it was, thus it is, thus it shall be. Only way you can do it is you got to change the way that they do it. If you want, I believe it needs to be changed. I've always thought that. There are other people, maybe Charlie may have a different point of view. I don't know, but I can assure you one thing is, by the actions of this country, by goaded on and prodded essentially by people who should know better, we have created a system that has made money more important today than it's ever been. And it was probably, like most things, done with the best intentions. And remember, when all this started, it started as reform. Everything starts that way. Thank you.
Charlie?
Thank you, Jill. Well, I'm happy to be back at the Institute and to be here in such distinguished company. I will say, I got a bad news message for James to start off. I think the celebrity consultant phenomenon is not bad as long as the celebrity is somebody who's an honest person and who believes in something and supports candidates, works for candidates who are consistent with their philosophy. And that's true of James Carville. It's not true of some of the celebrities. The bad news is I do want to talk about the Clinton 96 campaign. And let me, before I talk about some of the illegal activities of that venture, let me say that James ran the Clinton 92 campaign, which, as far as I know, complied with the law. He was an outside advisor, but did not run the Clinton 96 campaign, which did not comply with the law. So I want you to know I'm not holding him accountable for everything I'm going to assert, but I do expect him to defend the president in the campaign, needless to say.
Fair enough.
To add on quickly to some of Jules's history, the 1974 Federal Election Campaign Act did dramatically change the nature of presidential campaigns. The first campaign in 1976 was the first one that we had contribution limits. The W. Clement Stone contribution was perfectly legal under the law in 1972. But starting in 76, we had contribution limits, spending limits, public funding, partial public funding for presidential candidates in the primaries, full public funding in the general election. And then frankly, I don't see a lot of major changes in the way these campaigns were run between 76 and 92. But starting in 92, there have been some significant changes. I'm going to mention 4 big changes since 92, and then I'll be happy to elaborate on them in the question and answer period. The first one is what James was talking about, the proliferation of media sources. You had more networks, more news, more shows. Candidates could, even underdog candidates, can get on talk shows, radio and TV talk shows and interview shows every day. Plus, we all discovered satellite technology in '92 that would let you put your candidate in local station interviews all the time, every day. So frankly, there's a lot more exposure by the candidates, especially in the primaries, to the voters, if the voters decide to tune in, which is another issue I won't get into now. Second major change since '92 is the rise of the wealthy, self-funded candidates who don't play by the rules, who forego the public funding and the contribution and spending limits and spend their own money. Ross Perot, in 1992, spent $60 million out of his own pocket and was a major factor in the race. In '96, he spent about $35 million out of his pocket. Wasn't as big a factor, but still played a role in the campaign. Almost all Perot's money in both cases went to television ads. Parenthetically, in '92, about 90% of those were anti-Bush, anti-Republican Party ads. Steve Forbes spent $40 million of his own funds running in 1996. And Forbes' money almost exclusively went to TV ads, all crammed into a 3 to 4 month window. Jill was sitting under this withering fire I'm describing. 40 million basically in a 3 to 4 month window, all on ads, 90% of which were negative ads against Bob Dole, and Forbes played a major role in the campaign. Now, I don't deny these wealthy candidates their constitutional right to do this. The Supreme Court says they can. But maybe we need to change the system to free up the other candidates to raise more money and spend more money to be able to compete if they can't spend the money out of their own pocket. We can talk more about how you might do that later. The last two changes I want to talk about are major changes in presidential politics that took place in 1996. And hopefully they're aberrations which will not happen again. In 1995 and 96, President Gore, the Clinton-Gore campaign, the Democratic National Committee, engaged in a massive and successful effort to raise illegal campaign contributions and spend them on behalf of Clinton's candidacy. The quick inventory of those, which I'll be happy to elaborate on later, is illegal foreign donations to the Democratic National Committee, access to decision makers and policy concessions granted by the administration in exchange for illegal foreign donations, illegal money laundering of donations through legal U.S. citizens, labor unions, and a Buddhist temple, and improper use of the federal government to raise funds, examples being John Wong's presence at the Commerce Department on the payroll, the infamous White House coffees, and the sale of the Lincoln bedroom. And number 4, major change, this illegal foreign fundraising and money laundering, along with a good dose of aggressive legal domestic fundraising of soft money, allowed the Democratic National Committee to sponsor $25 million worth of so-called issue advocacy ads, improperly promoting the Clinton candidacy. Why improperly? Because the ads were written, created, edited, produced, and placed by the President, the White House, and the Clinton-Gore campaign. And nobody has said otherwise. Mr. Morris laid it out very carefully in several pages of his book. Way to go, Dick. The same story, though, corroborated by Bob Woodward in his book. Issue advocacy ads are legal if they're under the control of the national party. The rules say very clearly the party can consult with the presidential candidate, but they must control and write and produce and place the ads. The president and his campaign cannot control the ads. He did, in this case, control them. Now, these last two major changes in presidential politics that had a big impact in '96 should end. They should stop, and hopefully they will if the press and the voters are vigilant. You know, the sad part, being here in an academic institution, I can pretend to be a political scientist for a moment. The sad part of what the president and his campaign did is if you believe in strong political parties and a competitive two-party system for this country, the president and his campaign totally co-opted the National Democratic Party. They used all its resources in '96, plus left it with a huge debt, plus the prospect of being on defense legally for the foreseeable future, costing millions of dollars. The DNC didn't do anything for other candidates in '96, has no chance of doing anything for other Democratic candidates in '98, and maybe beyond. The campaign laws, the '74 Act that we're under, were not designed to have one candidate monopolize the resources of a national political party. That said, 1996 is over. Bob Dole authorized me to come here and concede tonight. Congratulations, James and President Clinton. And in light of what I've said, let me make two final points. I believe that the political parties should advertise on issues and demonstrate issue differences between the parties. I think that helps our democracy and educates our voters. I do think they should follow the rules and do it legally. And also, I do not happen to believe that we spend too much money in political campaigns in this country. And I do not buy the line that we spend too much money on political advertising. All the advertising done by all the presidential campaigns combined, even throwing in the illegal stuff that Clinton Gore did, but all the '96 presidential campaign advertising combined did not amount to as much spending as what the hamburger chains spent in 1996 advertising their products. Now, voters and consumers need information, but what's the more important decision? Who's going to be president, or whether you're going to eat at McDonald's or Burger King? To me, we need more information, more advertising, and more news coverage of politics and candidates and issues, and I think we can raise that money and spend it legally and ethically, and I hope both parties do that in the year 2000. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Jules, we're gonna start with you, but I think I'm going to throw my question out the window I had for James and just let him respond to Charlie.
Thank you. I will help you there.
Jules, as Charlie and James and you were saying, the 1996 campaign has been in the spotlight more so than any other campaign in recent times. We now know what a cup of coffee costs at the White House. From your historical perspective, is this something that has always gone on, that's just coming to light now, or is this wretched excess?
I don't know. It hasn't come to light. We know that. I think that perhaps these things have been going on for a long time with a little more finesse than was done in 1996. There have been the idea that people give money and want to get something for it. It should not be a surprise to anybody, and that politicians are well aware of that as well as anybody else is. But I mean, for myself, I was quite surprised about the stories about the Lincoln bedroom and the coffees and so on. But I can remember in other campaigns, other things were done that I was surprised about. The notion that all that's going on in this last cycle was comparable to Watergate, or was worse than Watergate. I think it's just absolutely preposterous, and I think that when we discuss what happened in 1996, we ought not to try to make that comparison, but just discuss it in terms of what we know about what happened in 1996.
Well, do you think that we've seen Senator Fred Thompson hold hearings and all summer and all fall? Congressman Dan Burton is doing that as we speak, addressing these issues from the '96 campaign. Do you think that has accomplished anything or will accomplish anything as we walk forward towards 2000?
Well, it certainly hasn't accomplished what the people who conducted those hearings hoped it would accomplish, which was to create a public outrage.
Right.
It didn't. I don't blame that on the committees. I blame it on the apathy that I talked about earlier. I think the hearings were useful, very useful. That they didn't light a fire is more of a commentary on how the public reacts to all these matters than it is about the conduct of those
Right.
hearings.
I think that's probably right. James, go to it.
Well, I guess I'm sort of compelled to say a couple things. I really didn't want to get into an argument about '96. I guess the first thing is I'm sort of stunned by this whole thing. It was like Bob Dole never went to Orlando before the ABC affiliates, and they said, "You've run out of money. What are you going to do for us?" And he said, "Oh, they have these issue ads where," and they had a biography of Bob Dole that they wrote. He sat there and told the ABC people that. And then we said, "Oh, God, Clinton did this." I mean, you know, and they say, "Well, why didn't people get excited about that?" Because they know. Now, of everything that you have ever heard about Bill Clinton and the Clinton Gore team, think of it all, take it all, digest it, assume the worst. Now double it in your own mind. Assume that everything that Charlie Black said is true, that everything that Dan Burton, old Watermelon Dan, says is true. Assume that they were doing all of this, take it and assume the worst, now double it in your mind. Now tell me if it even comes close to matching the fact that Trent Lott and Newt Gingrich put a $50 billion tax cut for cigarette companies at 1 o'clock in the morning. Who gave to the Republican Party about 10 to 1. Assume the worst. And for these people to come up and go, "Oh my God," it might be perfectly legal to give $50 billion of taxpayers' money to cigarette companies, but that don't make it right. Now, let's talk about the Lincoln bedroom. I'm going to get away from this. The last thing I'm going to say about it. I don't know about you, but if somebody it's the president's house, he wants to have a $50,000 contributor there, that's fine. You know, Rush Limbaugh attacked George Bush throughout the primaries in 1992, right? Guess what? Where did Rush go sleep? The Lincoln bedroom. And guess what? He stopped attacking Bush and started supporting him. It's not illegal. It's good politics. Now, I don't blame him for using the taxpayer-funded Lincoln bedroom to bring somebody in to get their support. It's his house. And they say, "Oh my goodness, the public is now outraged." When Dole goes down there and gives a speech, said, "We got these issue things, we got this money, don't worry, fellas, you're gonna," the news media was concerned that they weren't gonna make money because the Dole campaign was out of money. And he said, "No, we got it, don't worry about it. They got this little thing here in the law and we can do this." Some people say, "Gee, why they not outrage the Clinton?" Then they go $50 billion at 1 o'clock in the morning for the cigarette companies. And of course, when they get their hand, the cookie jar slammed on their hand, they say, "Oh, well, we'll just back off of that." Thank you. So that's what, you know. Now, if we wanted to have a discussion about what we can do to make it better, because again, I think that there's a way that we can talk about to can't remove money from politics, but you can remove the influence of money from politics. And I mean, I think that's what people want. I think people look at this stuff and they see that, guess what? Guess when the hearings ended? The Friday before the elections, and when they had Don Nichols sitting in his office raising money for the Triad Foundation. And they said, "Gee, well, they're over. That's it. We don't have any more time for this." People see that. They're not stupid. They're not stupid. And if people thought that we wanted to come in and to have some hearings and have some people that were serious about doing something and wanted to get at the truth and get at what we could do to make it better as opposed to just getting at the president, they would pay attention. But they saw this, and they saw it as just a way because the Republicans were sore because they lost the election, and they said, "This is a way to get in, and we can control the 2000 election." And people saw it, and they went, hell with it. Now, if somebody ever wanted to come back and talk about this other potentials of how we've created a system that creates this enormous pressure for this kind of money, creates this, and what can we do to make it, to address some of the things that we did maybe with good intentions and bad consequences in '74? What can these states do about how these primaries are? I bet you we'd be capable of coming up with something better than we got. But this is not a search. Just understand, this is not about anything being better than what we got. This is just about trying to get back at the present. And I wish we'd go back to the days in politics when we quit trying to make criminals out of our political opponents, tried to make fools out of them. Now, I understand nobody in the Republican Party is smart enough to make a fool out of the president, so they got to try to make a criminal out of him. But I mean, that's just politics, and I understand that, and you understand that. But that's enough of. I'm not even going to defend anymore 96. I want to talk about the sort of evolution of this, and I do hope that in 2000 or 2004 or whatever you folks get involved in politics, I hope we got a better system here than we got than we got right now. And that's what I'm really interested in.
Charlie, you can use part of your time to respond to that, but I wonder if you'd talk to us about, Jules brought it up, actually all three of you did, the whole issue of the independent expenditures in '96. I mean, we know from the Republican side, symbolically, the biggest independent expenditure was Willie Horton. In '96, the AFL-CIO spent, reportedly, that's what's been reported, $35 million. And I wonder if you could just respond to, you know, where that fits in this whole process.
I'll come back to it in a moment. The president and the vice president and most Democratic leaders, James is being very loyal here, have tried to impose a rhetorical and news media statute of limitations on the '96 campaign. They didn't want anybody to be able to discuss it or air out what happened there past January 1 of this year. But unfortunately, there are still some issues, and there are going to be more hearings. I won't dwell on it anymore either, but facts are facts. The Dole campaign did not raise illegal money and hasn't been accused of it. Secondly, the soft money expenditures by the Republican National Committee, played by the rules, were conducted by the National Committee. Most of them were not Dole ads. Most of them were geared to the states where we had competitive House races. And the Clinton campaign and the White House illegally conducted that soft money advertising campaign. Pick up Dick Morris's book and read it, and talk to any lawyer in town, and they'll tell you the facts on that. One other point, the Lott-Gingrich tobacco amendment said this: there's a serious proposal for a national global tobacco settlement, which is being considered this year, and which has a price tag of $368 billion in taxes for the industry, minimum. It may turn out to be more than that if it passes. All that amendment says was if we pass $50 billion in excise taxes in this year's budget, that in 1998 that'll be offset against the $368 billion plus. That's all it says.
Yeah, that gives them $50 billion that they wouldn't have. That's exactly what it says.
They're proposing,
Yes,
they're proposing as a compromise $368 billion on themselves. But I will abide by the statute of limitations and talk about more general things. The independent expenditures, and what that means is the Supreme Court ruled in 1976 in the Buckley versus Vallejo case, I know some of you have studied that an individual or a group had the right to spend unlimited amounts of money to promote a candidate or go negative on a candidate, that was a constitutional right, as long as they did not coordinate with the candidate or with one of the political parties. There's been a subsequent decision involving, it was a Colorado Republican Party case that came down about 2 years ago that said even a party organization, a Republican or Democratic party, county, state, or national party can do an independent expenditure in a race as long as they're not in coordination with the candidate that they've set out to help. So that's a constitutional right. That means that the AFL-CIO or Public Citizen or the NRA or Ross Perot or anybody else that wants to, as long as they abide by the rules of non-coordination, can do independent expenditures. I can tell you that as long as that's been around, going back actually to the first independent expenditure I encountered in the presidential campaign was 1976. The net of the independent expenditures that people did on the Republican side was usually a net negative. It always seemed to hurt us or inject some issue into the campaign that we weren't interested in, or to address an issue or the opposition in such a ham-handed way that it put us on defense rather than helping. But that said, there's no doubt that labor had a huge impact. Business did a much smaller effort, and some of the things they did were positive. They didn't nearly offset the huge expenditures labor did. I hope the business community, small, medium, and large, will get organized and support free enterprise candidates in opposition to what labor is doing. But that's a part of the process, and we have to get used to it. That's different from the campaign raising money illegally and illegally coordinating its expenditure with a party committee that added a $25 million extra budget item to the Clinton campaign.
Okay, I want to ask one last question of all three of you, if you'd answer it briefly, and then we'll move to the audience questions. In all of your years of collective experience, what is the most egregious campaign practice that you have run across in presidential politics over the years? Jules?
Well, I'm particularly disturbed by something that Charlie mentioned, and maybe for a different reason, and that is the ability and willingness of rich candidates to inject themselves and their money into campaigns, because it's not just a question of them spending their money. What they do is they play by a different set of rules. The practical result of a campaign is that if you don't win, you don't get money, and if you don't get money, you're out. This is a test. You might, I mean, I think it could be argued that this is the voice of the people. A candidate doesn't do well, he doesn't get money, he's out. A candidate like Steve Forbes never has to meet that test. He can just he could be totally unsuccessful. If he wants to come up with the hard cash, he could stay in. And if it was just a question of him staying in, that would be one thing. But to me, the Steve Forbes campaign was tremendously destructive in 1996, because he not only did what most candidates do when they're trailing, attack the guy who's ahead of him, he attacked everybody. He slandered everybody. Even Alan Keyes, he ran ads against Alan Keyes. And
I can vouch for all this.
All he did with his money was do what he could do to poison the well. And I found that outrageous.
Okay. James?
I think the most egregious thing that I see, I think it was more prevalent in '88 in '96 than it was in '92. Is the trivialization of political differences. I think presidential campaigns in '96, I mean, I think one of the reasons that it was a historic low turnout is that people didn't really feel like there was something big being discussed. And I think when you have smaller differences between the parties, that people, in one sense, say they want this bipartisanship or they want this, but in essence, I think the best thing, democracy works best when you put two contrasting ideas or ideals out there and have people go out and sort of get after each other, if you will. I mean, I think that politics needs more, I use the word just to be polemic, more name-calling, but name-calling, I think it's good to call somebody heartless right-wing or a tax and spend liberal, because that is on the issue. Or that delineates an issue difference, and that forces people to go out and make a choice about the direction of the country. When you start all of this goofy stuff that we see now in politics, if it's the whitewater trivia of this other trivial stuff we see, I think people back off on, or if it becomes just sort of this sort of mush in the middle that we see, I see people think, well, there's really not sort of a choice. It's not somebody articulating a direction or contrast in direction of the country. I like large, contrastive campaigns where there are real and fundamental differences are those that work better. What we've seen more and more of now is, I think, is more sort of campaigns that kind of meet in the middle. I mean, everybody, well, gee, I'm not really everybody is sort of somewhere between a 4 and a 6 on the sort of 1 to 10 scale, if you will. And a lot of that is a result, like I tell you, a lot of that is a result of the way that people come out of primaries, because everybody in the Republicans always nominate their candidate on the basis of primogeniture. That means this the guy, the oldest guy with the heaviest resume. I'm serious. They go there and they weigh the resumes. Gee, that was 3 kilograms and that was 2. We'll give it to this guy. Okay? And by and large, a lot of times when we have had ideological conflicts, i.e. 72, we've gotten reamed pretty good in the general election. So we don't have, the parties are sort of amorphous in where they stand today. The voters sense that. Now, I think, I'm optimistic that maybe in 2000, I hope we have a good, long, ideological, if both parties do, almost a real sort of debate in the primaries. And I think we've got a chance to do that. I think if we do, we'll have one hell of a great election in 2000. And it won't be arguing about this nickel-dime stuff which you did, you know what I mean, 15 years ago, or this other stuff. It'll be about which direction you want the country to go in. So I think the most egregious thing that I've seen in politics is actually the sort of trivialization or marginalization of political differences in this country about real things, and I think the real egregious thing we've seen is this sort of idea that if we can't beat someone that we disagree with, then we got to go out and try to make a criminal out of them, and people are just not buying it. But if we want to get people pulled back into the system, we ought to have some good, healthful other debates where people talk about fundamental differences of opinion, a fundamental different direction of country, and then let people decide. That is what I think. To some extent, I don't think it's so much the amount of money. I do have fundamental problems with the way you raise it and how it is, but I think I think it's the real fear that we have to really grab hold to something and say, let's have a fight about it. And I give Forbes credit for one thing. I mean, I think the flat tax is like the worst idea I've ever heard. But I do. But that's my opinion. I would love to see us have a debate, for somebody to come up, I'm for this, I'm for that. Let people choose. I mean, if you know what I mean, I'm just against the IRS, you know, which is like the political equivalent of being against homework. Okay? But if if Charlie's got a guy and he wants flat tax, or Jill's got somebody who wants a consumption tax, or somebody wants the income tax, somebody wants a progressive tax, somebody wants that, then people would, and you told people this is going to be the way that you pay your bills, they would be involved. I guarantee you'd have a lot of people there licking envelopes. You'd have a lot of people showing up at election day. And if somebody started talking about some arcane vote, or your attendance record was 40% when you're on the city council of Cedar Rapids in 1968, they said, get out of here, man, who cares? So maybe the best thing can happen for all of us is that we have a big election about a big thing and interject some big some big things, some big ideas, or even defend something in the system. But I couldn't, when it got right down to it, I mean, elections matter, and it did matter that President Clinton won and Senator Dole lost. It did matter don't think it didn't matter that the Republicans held the Congress, they do matter, but I don't think they matter near as much as they can or they ought to in a democracy. And it's too much, they need to go out and fight more and deal less. That's my opinion. More fights, less deals.
I actually fully agree with James on that. I think our political leaders have an obligation to lead a debate on huge, mega national issues, like school uniforms, for example.
Curfews.
Yeah, curfews.
Well, maybe we could have the flag amendment.
Midnight
That really was going to change the fundamental direction of the country.
No, I do agree with that, and I think it's very important. I think when we have big issue debates, we get more voter turnout. If you go back and track the races, you'll see that too. My most egregious practice, though, is to agree with Jules, except I think Perot is a lot worse than Forbes. Ross Perot, if he didn't have money, couldn't get elected dog catcher. In North Dallas, people would figure out the guy was nuts just when he went out knocking on doors asking for support, and he would not be a player. He had a dramatic impact on the 92 race and a not insignificant one on the 96 race. And keep in mind, this guy's got $3 billion. What if he decides to run again and spend $200 or $300 million? Whoever he spends it for or against, which is his election is irrelevant. Nobody's going to elect him, but who he chooses to run ads against could be a major thing. And I think we got to fix that problem. Supreme Court says people are entitled to spend as much of their own money to run as they want. Fine, I accept that. But we need to free up the contribution limits and the spending limits for the other people. And we need to figure out a way to do it with enough advance notice that you can actually catch up. But by the way, the James referenced the 74 Act creating a $1,000 contribution limit. In today's dollars, that's about $270. So if the only reform you did was to index the 74 Act for inflation, your contribution limit would be almost $4,000 for an individual per cycle, and for a PAC it'd be like, what would that be, 18,000 or something. Now, that sounds like bigger money, but as long as you have full and quick disclosure, and as long as we have an aggressive news media like we do to report these things, it would make it a whole lot easier on candidates for federal office, House, Senate, and President to raise their money. You can't go take a bunch of money from any particular individual or interest or group if it's the least bit suspicious without the press reporting it very quickly.
Okay, thank you all. Now we're going to move into the audience questions. We've got 4 microphones, 2 on the first floor, 2 on the second floor. I think I see the 2 on the second floor. We would ask, I'm going to read you the forum rules. I know you've all heard them before, but I don't want Heather to be mad at me, so I'm going to read the rules.
Where's the cell, man? I got to take this sweat off. I'm hot as hell, man.
Yes.
Recess.
Huh?
Recess, go ahead.
No, I just need. How do you unhook? Heather, how you unhook this thing?
All right, you take your sweater off, and I'll read
I'm
the
gonna
rules.
drink a gallon of
Why don't you just go home? I'll use your time. I don't know.
That's fine. How I get this thing off? I would take this sweat off. About to burn up here.
Well, we can't have that.
Damn, y'all ain't never heard of Carter's thing? I just put the thermostat on 65 or something?
James,
Anyway.
if you can't stand the heat, you know.
Take your clothes off, one of the 2.
The only questions that'll be answered will be from those at the microphone. Please identify yourselves when you ask a question, and please, the most important thing of all, don't make statements. Please ask questions. So why don't we start right here?
My hair's all wet.
What hair?
Yeah, fat chance.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jeff Francer. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I have a question for Mr. Black. In 1996, didn't RNC Chairman Barber also go after money in Hong Kong? And don't Republican congressional leaders also routinely provide access to big donors? In other words, are the Republicans completely innocent in the issues that you discussed?
It's traditional for people in both parties to spend time with their donors and to invite them into places, but it's never been as blatant as give $50,000 for a ticket to a White House coffee, or you give $100,000. Remember, the president's initials were on the memo about shouldn't we invite people to sleep over in the Lincoln bedroom. He made a note and initialed it for $50,000 and $100,000 donors. Now that, let the legal system decide. Apparently, we're not going to have a thorough investigation or a prosecution, and I'm not out to make the president a criminal. I would like to see this not happen again. The Haley Barbour thing. The Republican Party has an organization called the National Policy Forum. It's very similar to the Democratic Leadership Council, those who are familiar with that. It's a think tank. It does not produce ads or run ads or support candidates. It's an educational foundation. It had 64 hearings, public policy forums around the country. It produced 2 books out of those. A 501c4 educational foundation is eligible to receive foreign donations. It did. That money did not benefit the Republican National Committee. In fact, the Republican National Committee was a net donor of about $2.5 million to the National Policy Forum. Furthermore, Haley Barbour went up to the Hill, to the Thompson Committee, and to other interested legal authorities who asked and explained all this, and no one has suggested illegality since that, and it was easy to investigate that transaction because nobody took the Fifth Amendment and nobody fled to China. You could get to the bottom of it real quick.
James or Jules, do you want to react to
Well,
any of this?
I don't want to react. They subpoenaed Republican operatives, and they just said we're not going. And they said, fine, there's no way we can force them. Who? Sure. How many Republican operatives were subpoenaed, and they said we're just not going to show up?
I don't
Jill
know.
knows that.
I don't know
Everybody
of
across it. And all they got to say, if you don't show up, then we won't have anything to do with you anymore.
Well, I think
that was
there
the
were plenty
answer.
of Democrats that didn't show up
But
either.
again, I don't want to get into a tit-for-tat thing here. Really don't. What I want to do is talk about, that's the thing we got, you're right. We got a 501c4, we got a 501c3, we got this is eligible. This thing is not designed to help Republican candidates, but the Republican National Committee gave it $2.5 million. We gave it $2.5 million. Why? Because it was trying to cure hunger in Zimbabwe, or they thought it was going to help Republicans. I mean, and that's what people hear. They hear that, well, this is really something here, and that's a 501c4, and we didn't do this, but yet we gave it $2.5 million because it produces 2 books. And they got 2 people that read the 2 books on a good day.
I think that's one of the problems with this whole debate is that it gets to be so convoluted that people say ultimately, whether it's true or not, that there's no difference between the two parties. They're both rotten to the core. They're both constantly playing games with money, and so you see what happened with the Thompson hearings. That people just eventually
You know, Jules,
turn off.
what I said earlier, I really agree. I think people are looking for a big debate, and I think if you had that, you'd clear a lot of this, and I hope we have. I mean, we may have it in 2000. We may have it in 2000.
Let's go up here to the microphone.
My name is Zachary Carabell. I'm a fellow at the Shorenstein Center, and I'm writing a book on the presidential election of 1948. I want to read a three-line thing from a New York Times article in 1948 called "It Costs Too Much to Run," where a governor of Oregon who was elected in 1910 says that he was elected for $3,000 in 1910, and he says, "Today, $3,000 would just about buy you half an hour on statewide radio. Folks once came from miles around by horse and buckyard to attend a political rally. Now they wait for you to go into their homes by radio and newspaper, advertising, or direct mail. That takes a lot of money. It makes a candidate reliant on outside financing unless he happens to be a very rich man. His independence is reduced. He becomes committed to the labor unions or real estate or other special interests." So clearly this has been a problem for a long time. I have a question for Charles Black and for James Carville. One, Mr. Black, just curious what gives you the right to call these things illegalities, because unless my eyes deceive me and there are 11 men hiding behind the curtain, you're one person with an opinion and not a jury. My other question for both Mr. Carville and Mr. Black is, what should the role of money be in a presidential election, the kind of partisan what happened in '96 notwithstanding?
The assertions I've made and the examples I've used have all been reported in the news media. I've got documentation for them. Some of these transactions will never be proven in court because certain people have already fled the scene and gone to China, and frankly because they're not being investigated thoroughly enough. But I can give you the facts as reported by distinguished journalists, some of Mr. Whitcover's colleagues, and I can give you the law, and you can put it side by side and judge for yourself. Let me reiterate, I don't think we spend too much money in politics. And I also believe, by the way, that it's not that people buy political influence. I do think that 99% of the money from individuals, PACs, corporations, unions, whatever, is they find somebody who agrees with their position and who will promote their position if they get elected and give to the guy who's on their side. It's not that people run for office and start out as neutral. They're neither conservative nor liberal nor pro-business nor pro-union. Most of the time it's the money chasing the philosophy rather than the other way around. That said, I think, you know, one fact I didn't throw out there, of all the commercials run on television in the United States in 1996, 1% were political ads. 1%. So you see voter turnout declining, you see the voters having less and less information, society's changed, the culture's changed. You got to pound it through all these different media, and the more ads we have, the better. But we got to make it easier to raise the money, which is why I would support James's suggestion that we raise the contribution limits, combine
Exactly James's suggestion.
Well, what did you mean about the inflation factor?
I think that I have an alternative.
Well, all right.
suggestion.
In
Okay.
1989, President Bush sent a campaign finance reform plan to the Hill, which I helped with. It would have abolished soft money, limited the PAC contribution limit from $5,000 to $2,500, but raised the individual contribution limit to $4,000. That change would still be relevant, even though it's an 8-year-old change. But I think you let people give more money with full and quick disclosure so the news media can punch it up on the computer within 24, 48 hours of the time they give it. And that's how you solve the problem of candidates being preoccupied with money. I do not favor having the government fund these campaigns.
James?
Just make a point here. There's an enormous amount of power in Washington. Power to raise taxes, lower taxes, tax exemptions, euthanasia, abortion, how much effluent you can discharge, the size of your shower head, how much money we spend on defense, health, everything. And these decisions are they're people in a democracy, there's just an enormous amount of power in that city. You literally can walk through the city and you can feel how much power that they have. And that's the way it should be. I mean, we have this government, we give it a ton of power. Common sense tells you that if you have people with that much power and you have an intersection of that much money, that common sense, just natural common sense is going to tell you that there's a tremendous potential for corrosive effect. That's human nature. You can go back, and I didn't go to Harvard, but you can read the Greeks. You can read everything there is in history and tell you that you can't have an intersection of that much power and that much money without there being the potential for I like to use the word corrosion because I'm sure there's been some corruption, somewhere in some place, but corrosion is a better word. And I don't think that it's going to make it better if you say, let's put more money where they have more power, because I think you just make it exponentially. But now what we've done is that people are going to always figure a way to get around it. The point I was trying to make is that you spend more time raising money because the Constitution limits have remained stagnant. At the same time, you front-loaded the primaries, and again, it's just stunning to me that no one has sort of figured this out yet, and that's why we have this. So instead of having an idea, somebody coming forward with an idea of what we can do, and I think it's better if we have a country where we judge people on the power of their ideas and not the power of their pocketbooks. And if somebody has a good idea, then and there's a way that you can do this. And let me tell you shorthand how you can do it. You can pass a law saying no federal office holder may accept anything of value, may accept or solicit anything of value from anyone outside their immediate family. And you say, well, is a campaign contribution a thing of value? And I say, yes, it is. You say, fine. How do you fund campaigns? Simple. If you are a non-federal office holder, that is, if you're running for office and you're not a congressman, you're not a senator, you're not a president, you're not a vice president, I'll go to Charlie Black's plan, let you raise as much money from whomever you want. Again, the thing is you immediately disclose how much money you raised and who the person is that gave you money, with total affiliation. It got to be, Charlie Black, president of Black, Kelly, and whatever his firm is, engages in this, et cetera, et cetera. James Carville, Democratic, blah, 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 whatever, And at the time that money is deposited, then 85% of that amount goes to the incumbent out of a public fund. You want to put your own money in? Fine. Perot puts $30 million in, then the person that runs against him gets $30 million too. I can stop you from putting it in, but we'll match, out of a public fund, we match whatever goes in there. That's it. And you could look, if you did that simple constitutional thing, it would probably cost $600 million a year out of a $1.8 trillion budget. One simple thing. Then you could look at Washington and you could say, you know what? They make decisions in that city because they want to get reelected. That's probably true. They make decisions in there because they're egomaniacs. That'd probably be true. They make decisions in there because they're ideologues. That's probably true. But the one thing you'll know is they don't make the decision based on money, because you have totally removed money from being an incumbent. Totally. And again, I say, if you want to put your own money in, you're worth $5 million, you write a check for $5 million. Unless you think you can break the federal treasury, you're going to lose the auction. You're going to lose the auction. And then you got it. And then that way, you know how many fundraisers Trent Lott goes to in a week? Guess. I have no idea. If I told you 25, would you be surprised?
Wouldn't be as many as Bill Clinton.
But certainly. He goes to him. It had nothing to do. It's got to be yes, the president comes up here to Boston, he does a fundraiser. Just think, he couldn't do that. It would be against the law. He could just sit there and read legislation or play with his new dog or whatever it is he wanted to do. Yeah, Bill Clinton, Dick Gephardt, but how much a majority? That's all every night in Washington, I guarantee you there's 25 fundraisers. And you're going to tell somebody that plain common sense doesn't tell you that money doesn't have a huge influence. In fact, frankly, it's an untenable argument. And there's a way that they could do this thing and take it out. There's a way. And, I mean, but as long as, right, as long as people, as long as the debate is just, you know, is what we get, and I bet, you know, it's, well, you did this, you did that, you did this, you look at that, you did that, that guy did this, and he took this, and he did that. People go, damn, I don't want to hear it anymore. But again, that's what, somebody could take that idea, run on a big idea. But Charlie's got a big idea, take everything away, fully disclose or something, that's fine too. But get out there and have a big debate about a big thing and get after it. But I'm telling you, in my opinion, you got that much power, and it's right we should have that much power. That's the way it works in a democracy. That much money, you're going to have mischief, you're going to have corrosion, you're going to have a lot of things that you see that you get.
Jules, quick question, then we'll come over here. In light of what James and Charlie said and what we've heard tonight, do you think that there's any realistic chance that we'll have any kind of, to use James's word, reform in time for the 2000 election on the campaign?
Well, I mean, there
front?
seems to be agreement that a substantial agreement that soft money ought to go, and as a minimum, I would like to see that happen. I think it could happen. But when we're talking about money, let me just throw one thing in here that we haven't talked about money, and that is, what has money done to presidential campaigns? It's taken it out of communities all over the country and put it in television studios. When I first started covering politics, you could go into any town, you could find a storefront where there were debates going on, where people were discussing politics, licking envelopes, all this. There were presidential campaigns in every state, in every town, and people were involved. Now, because of the demands of television, it's like a big siphon, like Ross Perot's suction cup or whatever, that pulls all this money out of communities and out of any kind of local grassroots political activity and into television studios. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I think it's a very, very serious problem, and I think that's one of the reasons, getting back to my lament about apathy. You can't have any, you don't have any political campaigns in the country anymore. Not on Main Street.
Right.
You have them in television studios and in your own living room if you're watching television.
Yeah, that was, remember what it, Bob Trump said, I guess it was 1990, a political rally in California is 3 people around a television set.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I did a race in Greece one time, and they said, well, that's at a rally in Salonika last night. So how many people? I said, 500,000. I said, I said, we're going to win. He said, oh, no, we always get 500,000 in Salonika. Got 500,000 in Salonika, we lost anyway. But, yeah, if you
Let's go over here.
Hi, my name is Glenn Gritzner. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School and also the chair of the Campaigns and Elections Professional Interest Council, and we're happy to have
Wow.
you. It's a lot of syllables. My question has to do with the role of interest groups in the primaries. And the condensation, the front-loading of primaries seems to not only increase the role of the media, but also increase the importance of grassroots organization. And the left spent many years using the primaries to make sure that their candidate was ideologically pure. But maybe not as electable as some people would have liked. So you had Dukakis and Mondale, and even Carter sort of fell into this category. And now the Republicans, and then in '96, the Democrats decided they wanted to win and maybe even have a chance to be reelected, and so they let Bill Clinton through. So my question is sort of a broad and a specific one. The broad one is the role of interest groups in primaries good for democracy and good for the ultimate campaign that comes out? And the specific question is the growing influence of interest groups on the right that now candidates on the right are having to jump through, does that mean that it's going to be more difficult for Republicans to get people who are electable through the primary season?
I'll take the first crack at it. The first thing is, look, there's no way you can make everybody equal in a democracy. Some people work harder, give more, participate more, scream more, they get heard more. That's just the way it is. I mean, I wrote a book, chastise Democrats, say, oh, you know, you find the Democrats saying, oh, well, the Christian coalition is doing this and they doing that, and they, well, get off your duff and go do something. I mean, if you want to hear a belly aching session, get around 5 liberals. They'll whine about everything, the whiniest people in the world. And I mean, at some point, I mean, Now, I don't want to get into, but at some point, there's no way that you can take interest groups out of politics. There's no way you should. There's no way constitutionally you can. It would be sort of futile to try it. But I mean, most people, if you look at the abortion debate, I mean, you got one side saying it's totally wrong, another side saying it's totally right, and you got about 80% of people in the country saying, gee, I don't know. I mean, you think about it, it's probably not that good an idea, but I don't know if I want to outlaw it. You know what I mean? But I mean, we all, we're sort of torn between, but there's no way that you can, interest groups are always going to be important, and the squeaking wheel is always going to get heard. And the only way to combat that is to be, to find something that you're interested in and participate in that also. I just say in terms of money, you could at least, you could let people, at least if they hollered aloud as opposed to give the most money, they could be heard. But there's no way that they're going to get, these folks are going to get heard. And the problem with America is not that we have too many interest groups, it's that we have too few. Is not that we have too much interest in politics, we got too little. We need more people getting involved, and more people in different interest groups, and more people getting interested as opposed to fewer.
James talks about big ideas. A big idea that dealt with the problem of special interest groups was the Vietnam War. It brought people who ordinarily weren't involved in the process into the process, and it dwarfed a lot of special interest groups. Unfortunately, how often do we have an issue?
Well, I hope we ain't got to kill 59,000 kids to get people interested.
But unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any kind of issue that's come along since then that galvanizes people who ordinarily don't take part in the process.
I agree with James. We need more people and more groups involved. And, in the Republican Party, I give this same lecture to moderate Republicans all the time that come whining to me about the Christian Coalition took over my precinct and all this stuff. Well, go get your friends and go out to the next precinct meeting and take it back over. If people want to whine instead of participate and organize and get out and work, I've got no consolation for them. But, the phenomenon of the increased dependence of people on television, both news and ads for their political information, has actually, if anything, lessened the impact of so-called special interest groups in these primaries and caucuses. I think that's why a moderate candidate like a Clinton could come through. We haven't nominated the most conservative candidate since Reagan. And even Reagan had Phil Crane running to his right. Y'all are too young to remember Phil, but he's still an important member of Ways and Means. So I think I'm not worried about, if another 8 or 10 groups in each party pop up that motivate people to get out and work and vote and get other people to vote. I'm for it.
Okay,
Again, I just go back to, because I've kind of come over one side. If we had bigger ideological differences in this country and talked about things, I think people would be more stimulated. Now, I got to tell you that the only interest I've seen that it affects both parties is this trade thing. Which is and that's not reconciled either here, or this whole status nationalism trade thing's not reconciled here, or Canada, or Britain, or France, anywhere else. Watch out. That's a tough one for everybody.
We have time for one very quick question.
Okay,
Go
hi.
out there.
My name is Robert Yoon. I'm also a student at the Kennedy School. I want to ask about what Mr. Black and Mr. Whitcover were saying about political ads and money. What effect do you think having free airtime for campaign ads would have on campaigns? Do you think that do you think that candidates would raise and spend? It would help candidates raise and spend less money, or that they would spend the same, raise the same amount, just spend it in different ways?
Well, I think if it could be done overnight, it would be great help. But there's a huge constitutional question about it, and I don't know how that would be resolved. But certainly, I think if you could give free time and limit how much time, maybe it would be a solution to the problem that I just raised about getting money back into the neighborhoods, getting politics back onto Main Street, and not making the campaign almost solely a function of television. There is a big problem about the whole question of limiting television or requiring the networks. Beyond me, I don't understand why we can't require the networks to give time. It's supposed to be our time.
Well, there actually might be a way to do it legally. The problem is, can you carve up the time and use it for 30-second spots and 60-second spots in the places you want, that you know, the shows you want that you now can pay for? There was an effort for free prime time for the presidential candidates, which Paul Taylor led, and which was given to Clinton and Dole, and nobody here even knows about it, do you?
Right.
They were on prime time, how many times?
Oh, a lot.
Probably 20 times each.
Yeah.
And they were in shows like Primetime Live and Dateline. They got, was it 2 minutes a shot?
Yes.
But it didn't have much impact. So that kind of...
shot and 4 shots a network.
Yeah, that kind of free time is not going to change the system any. If you could figure out how to legally give people free spots and let them pick when they wanted them and all, sure, it would save money, and maybe it could go into more grassroots activity. Jules is right that presidential campaigns don't reach to neighborhoods anymore, and unfortunately, in about half the districts in the country, congressional campaigns don't even reach down to the neighborhood level. They're all TV campaigns.
2 points is, I do a lot of work in Brazil, and I have yet to figure out how they do TV time there. It's all figured on a party, gets a sort of an allocation. I've had friends of mine that have done work in Israel that came back and they hadn't figured out how much there's sort of a set formula. I just did a race in Honduras where you can't campaign in the last week. Okay, none of which you could do here because our Constitution is different. But keep something in mind. Don't despair. In 1992, think about this. 1992, more people watched the last debate than watched the Super Bowl. Yeah. But 92 million people sat down for an hour and a half. And I think that, you know, now the number went way down in 96. I think it went down like 80 or something like that. It was by every way that we measure, there was a sort of a decline. But I think people. I mean, I have the heart and soul of an optimist, and I think people, if you give people something big and something to chew on and think about that they think is important and relevant to them, they'll get involved. And if you explain to them that it's not a perfect system that we design, but we can design a better one, they'll come back, they'll get involved.
Okay, thank you, James, Jules, and Charlie, for everything. Thank you all for coming tonight.